Really, my task tonight with you is to make you a little bit uncomfortable. But the goal is not to make you uncomfortable just for you to feel pain. It's to invite you to take some action. Invite you to take some action because what you do matters. Okay? What you do matters. You see all the survey slides on there? It talked about the influence that parents have over their children. The attitude that you have towards drugs and alcohol and cigarettes in your house matters. I'm not surprised that in this community there were more parents who thought that their kids smoked weed than the kids were saying, because that belief is part of what influences you. It's part of what influences your children. The culture here in this community has and continues to amaze me. From the first time I walked in here in 1989, then I was a crisis worker with the Family Service and Mental Health Center at that time, Police Social Services crisis worker. And the attitude in this community towards drugs and alcohol, particularly teen drugs and alcohol use and abuse, stunned me. It was very relaxed. I would say it was to the degree where it was expected and celebrated. The thing I would routinely hear about parties in Thatcher Woods was that the only thing that had changed over the past 20 years was the price that someone paid for their cup when they went into a party in the woods. And I heard that jokingly referenced by people in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, even in their early 60s. That this is just how it is. It's our children, your children, who have turned this place and talk about these communities as Toke Park and Reefer Forest. Those aren't wisecracking adults, those are children who come up with those things. And speaking of children and bravery, I want us all to take a moment to acknowledge the bravery that it took for our last two speakers to come up and talk about their personal stuff. So can we please take another moment to just thank them? And I would also ask our friends in the press who are here tonight to honor the request for the individual's anonymity as they spoke. I think there may be some parts of their story, they might be comfortable with pieces of that being put in, but not with being identified or with having their image put out. Accurate? Okay, so I'll ask you to honor that request as well. There are a couple of tasks that I have, and I'm aware of what time it is, and that we want to get to a question and answer phase as well. So I'm going to ask my colleague Bert Battaglia to start making his way up here to talk about something I'm going to ask him to speak about in just a moment. But I want to go back on this theme of it matters what you do. If you would, please finish this phrase for me. Birds of a feather. There's an article in the Chicago Parenting Magazine, which I think is owned by Wednesday Journal, just this past week, that spoke about the influence of your kids' friends when they are in middle school. And it turns out that negative relationships, in other words, to use a lot of high-end clinical terminology, if your kid hangs out with kids who do knucklehead behavior when they're in middle school, they are far more likely to get into more knucklehead behavior, including poor academic performance, including drugs and alcohol, including breaking the law. So you need to know who your kids' friends are, and I'm begging you, please get in a relationship with the parents of your kids' friends. It is not enough to meet them once on your turf. You need to meet them and their parents on their turf. And you know what that means? That means you got to get a little bit uncomfortable. You got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. How many of you love your kids? You know, I want to ask you to do something real quick. You love your kids, stand up. Stand up and get your feet under you, and I'll answer the question again, and this time answer in the affirmative if that fits. If it doesn't fit, we need to have a conversation immediately, okay? But the question is if you love your kids, when I ask you, you say yes, okay? Try to say it like you mean it, all right? Get your feet under you here. Do you love your children? Yes. That's good to know. Do you love your children? Yes. How many of you know somebody in your personal life, through your friends, through your family, through a colleague at work, somebody that you know, not somebody that you read about, not Lindsay Lohan, not Charlie Sheen, somebody that you know in your real life who has a problem with drugs, with alcohol, that they have lost a friendship, lost a relationship, lost a job, gotten in trouble with law enforcement, lost some health, lost a day of work, lost time, lost an evening, lost a memory, lost something else that is important to them. All right, those of you in the front, turn around, look around, keep your hands up. In case you had any doubts, it turns out that this whole substance abuse, addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, this turns out it affects all of us. For those it hasn't affected personally, it affects all of us in other ways in terms of how it affects our world and what we live in. Please have a seat again. Good, if you want. One of the ways I was talking about with a couple of classes of 8th graders who were involved in this party that was referenced earlier a couple of weekends ago from a private school in the area is and made the connection between a woman that they were calling the bravest woman in Mexico. Anybody know what I'm talking about there? Her name's Valis. And she's a 20-year-old woman who took over as the chief of police in a border town in Mexico near Texas. She took over as the chief of police after that job was open for a year because the previous chief was found beheaded by drug traffickers. It's a town of 10,000 people, and in 1 week they had 8 murders. Now, what does this have to do with drugs and alcohol up here? The people doing those horrible things and making life miserable for those folks are the folks who make profit off of getting drugs from Mexico through Texas up to Illinois into your backyard and into some of your homes. There's a connection there. As a police force, you know what they were having them do the past year? She was having their 18 police officers go into people's houses, not looking for the bad guys. They were going into the houses of people and talking to them about family values and about what it means to be a good citizen, because that's what needed to be revitalized in that community. I want to tell you that the battleground that we were talking about in this community, the major battleground is around your dining room table. The major battleground on this issue is in your living room. The major battleground for this, whether we win or lose, is in your house. Because the number one place where kids use are in your homes. Number one place is someone else's home. Number 2 place is your home. Number 3 is in a car. All 3 of those are problematic. I'm sorry that it turns out that parenting is a lot of work. Let me be the one to tell you, parenting turns out to be an awful lot of work. And it doesn't get easier as you go along. There's more things you have to pay attention to. The good news about it is, in this community, you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to do this alone. There's a lot, there's 59 of you were taking that thing, and I know most of the professionals in the room were not clicking it, so there's 59 of you that are not mercenaries in this, okay? This is your kids. Please, make sure that you meet a couple of other parents tonight, exchange names, exchange phone numbers, and start to build your own little coalition around this, okay? And get comfortable with getting uncomfortable. Ask each other questions. What are the rules at your house? These are the rules at mine. And this is how I want to check things with you. Please check with me. And if you see my son, if you see my daughter doing something they're not supposed to do, doing a behavior that you would be concerned about if it were your child, please call me. Please get uncomfortable enough to call me and tell me so that I can do something about it. Because if your son or daughter was doing something and a parent saw it, I would hope you would want to hear it. And when you do hear it, don't slay the messenger. We get doors slammed and phones hung up on and thrown at us at different times when we deliver bad news to people. But understand, we're trying to do it with the most love that we can, because we know you love your kids. We believe you love your kids, and you want to do the best thing by them. And sometimes that is really, really difficult thing to do, but there's nothing more important than that. I want to end with a quick story, and then we're going to go to our panel. Okay? There's a story of a man's walking along, and he sees a farmer sitting out on the porch, and his dog is laying on the porch, and they're talking about the weather, and every now and then the dog starts crying, going, and the man says, "What's wrong with your dog?" And he says, "Nothing." They talk for a while longer, and every now and then the dog again will cry, make some sound, and he keeps asking, "No, really, what's wrong with your dog?" And the farmer finally says, "Oh, he's laying on a nail." And he says, well, why isn't he moving? He goes, it's not hurting enough yet. In this past year, there have been hundreds of parents who have come out and gotten involved in this. There are hundreds of parents who have attended these cafes. There are dozens and dozens, and there's going to be dozens more who put these signs out on their front lawn to take a message. Somebody was telling me that they had theirs taken away. We have another one for you. They're available out on the end. Don't worry about taking them. We'll make more, okay? We'll get more. But there are things you can do. Please don't wait for it to get uncomfortable, because like the officer was, like Commander Williams was mentioned out in Deerfield, don't wait to get for an event to become so uncomfortable that it's a young person's death, because we've had that in this community too. And the thing that I am pleased by you and encouraged by all this is for a solid year now we've been having this conversation, and it's not because somebody in your community died. Because the previous 4 or 5 times that we've had this kind of a movement and this kind of attention to it is after a young person's dead. Let's not get to that point. Let's make the change now, right? So if you're ready to do something about that, once again, when you get on your feet, to say yes, all right? If you're ready to do something about this, when you get on your feet, to say yes. Are you ready to do something about this? Yes! Are you ready to do something about this? Yes! Are